In this video, we're going to be learning how to make a pawn and a bishop. In order to do this, we're going to be using splines, soft selection, and the compound object Boolean. Now, because I don't want to be dealing with merging our objects all into one scene, and we're going to be setting up our chess pieces together, I'm going to go ahead and use the same scene right here that we used to make the rook in the previous video. If you look over here on the Scene Explorer, we have the rook object right here. If I click the eyeball there, that will hide the rook in the background. Well, it'll hide the rook from view, so that way it looks like we've got a clean slate to begin with. So we're going to go back to the Create Object tab. We want Standard Primitives, and we're going to start with a plane. Just click and drag your plane like this, and that'll create your plane. You can see it right here. From there, we're going to do something which we generally speaking shouldn't do, but we're going to do it this time just because we're going to use this plane as a point of reference. So on this folder right here, I have an image that has a silhouette of various chess pieces. I'm going to click and drag, and I'm just going to drop it right on top of the plane there. And in just a moment, you'll see that the chess pieces show up there. Now in this viewport up here, the front, I'm going to click on wireframe. I'm going to change it to default shading so I can see the chess pieces there. Now, if for some reason the reference image that we use doesn't have quite the right proportions, we can always grab our scaling tool and then scale it side to side in order to get the right ratio for height to width of this image. Now, the part of that process that we generally shouldn't make a habit of is just simply dragging and dropping our images straight onto objects in the scene. We'll deal with making textures and materials in a little bit, but generally speaking, we should be using our material editors right here in order to add our textures and images to our objects. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to click this plus button right here, and then I'm going to click Maximize Viewport, and you'll see it takes my front view, makes it the only viewport visible, and hides the other three. Now we're going to be working with this pawn, so I'm going to move it to the center of the screen and zoom in on it. Again, use your scroll wheel to zoom. And then over here in the Create Objects tab, we're going to start with our splines. So this is the Geometry tab right here. It's a sub-tab of Create Objects. Then we have Shapes here, Lights, Cameras, Helpers, Space Warps, and Systems. Systems, by the way, is where you're going to find your bones and your biped, but we'll deal with that stuff in a much later time. So if you click on Shapes, the default menu here is Splines. We're not going to be dealing with these other ones for now. We'll just stick with Spline and click on Line. Now the Line tool works a lot like the Pin tool in other graphics programs. Those of you familiar with Photoshop or Clip Studio Paint, you'll know that the Pin tool, you click a point, and then if you click and drag, you'll create a curvature like that. The Spline tool works like that, except we're working in 3D space. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that line I just put in there. Whoops. Remember, you can remove an object from the scene simply by selecting it and then hitting the delete button on the keyboard. But now we're going to go ahead and begin tracing out our pawn here. What I want to do is start right at the tip of the pawn here. I'm going to come down to right about here. I'm going to click and drag. That creates a vertex there and lets me start creating that first segment. And now something to pay attention to. This line that extends out past the vertex, that's going to start setting the curve for the next point as well. So when I release, you'll see that line is set there, and then this one, the magnitude of the curvature was set by how far away from that curve, from that vertex there to begin with. I'm just going to come right here, and I'm just going to click once. And when you click like that, that creates a sharp corner, so that way you don't have a curvature for the next segment. So I'm going to click right here and I'm going to drag. That creates a curvature again. Now, the magnitude is going to be too great going in this direction for following the silhouette. So what I'm going to do now is hold down the Alt button and move my cursor closer to that point. I'm just going to go ahead and bring it down a little bit, and that's going to set the magnitude and direction of the next curve in the direction of the cursor. So when I release, you can see the lines going in that direction to begin with. So I'm going to go to there, and then I'm going to click. I'm going to come down here, click and drag, just get it close to the same curvature. And it looks like if I just click right here, I don't even have to drag it. It's going to more or less follow the silhouette. Although if I look over on this side, it looks like it's supposed to be a little bit more smooth there. So let's go ahead and go down to here instead. Click and drag. Hold down Alt to bring it in closer. And I'm going to come down to this point here, click and drag. Hold down Alt, and I'm going to re-angle it in this direction. And now if I just click right there and go like that, get a little curvature there, hold Alt, go in this direction. And then we're just going to go right to the middle of the pond, which I think is right there. And then I'm going to right click, which will end the spline. But if for any reason you need to close the spline, you can always go right back up here, click there. It'll ask you if you want to close the spline. I don't want to. Whoops. Now I've got an extra segment there that I don't need. We'll fix that. So the way we're going to fix that is we're going to click on the Modify tab. And then just like the Edit Poly, we have multiple ways we can do our sub-object selection. We have vertex here, so we can click an individual vertex and move it around if we need to. So like if I click there, click the Move tool. Let me move up a bit here. You can see I can move that single vertex around, and it redirects the line. If I select a vertex like that, we have these these curvature points here. Anchor points. Pretty sure that's the right term. Sorry. We can adjust them as we need it. This segment right here, we don't want. I've got two ways I can get rid of it. First, I can hit that vertex right there and then hit delete. Or I can click on the segment tool. Segment selection, click on the segment, and then hit delete there. Either way works. So now we have a spline that covers half of the pond. And we're going to convert this spline into a 3D model. So we're going to click on our modifier list. I'm going to scroll down, and we're going to find a modifier called lathe. For those of you who aren't familiar with that term, a lathe comes from the tool that's used to create various spindle-shaped objects. For instance, baseball bats, table legs, anything that's pretty much a rounded wooded object is going to be made on a lathe. I'm going to click this right here, and it's going to look really funny at first, kind of like a candlestick. So the reason for that is our axis for where we're spinning the spline around in order to make the 3D object is too far to the left here. You see the center of this gizmo marks the center of the axis. Now if you look right here, there's this arrow. Any one of these modifiers where you see there's an arrow, you can expand it down, and there's various selections you can do. For instance, vertex selection, segment, line. Didn't mean to click any of that. On lathe, we have axis right here. And if I select that with the move tool still selected, I can drag it this way, and our pond comes into existence. So now I'm going to restore the viewport and just move this over here. Ignore the fact that the plane is cutting through it, but you see we have our pond. Now that black area down here, we'll fix it in a moment. We may have a small black area on the top as well. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the plane. And zoom in here. Yeah, we've got the black area there. So this is a bit of Z fighting going on and possibly some inverted polygons, meaning the inside of the polygon is on the outside of the mesh. This could cause some issues with some later steps, so let's fix that. So we're going to add another modifier on here called edit poly. We've used that one before. And we're going to do, there's a couple of ways we could fix it. Let's try vertex first. I don't think vertex is going to work, but we'll try it anyways. So I've got vertex selected, and I'm zooming in at the top, and we have all these vertices right there. I'm going to go ahead and select them all, scroll down, and we're looking for the word collapse right here. If we hit collapse, oh, worked nicely. So what it did was that all the vertices I had selected, it collapsed them all into a single vertex. So there's only one there now. I'm just going to drag it down just a little bit to give a little bit more of a rounded tip. I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to change this back to wireframe simply because it helps me see what's going on. Yeah, down here at the bottom, we've got the same issue. We've got a whole bunch of vertices, and that's probably causing this inversion right here. So let's go ahead and box select that. And if I zoom in over here, you'll see I've accidentally selected those vertices as well. Again, we can just hold down Alt and deselect them by clicking on them. And now we only have these vertices in the middle selected. Once again, let's try collapse, and it worked nicely. Sometimes it doesn't work nicely, and the solution to it not working nicely would be you do polygon selection, and you'll just select all the polygons down at the bottom. Well, let me go ahead and hit undo a few times to show you. So we're going to select the polygons on the bottom here. I'm going to, whoops, let's try that again. I'm going to hold down Alt, deselect those parts right there so I only have the bottom selected. And then I'm going to hit the delete button on the keyboard, which removes those vertices. I'm sorry, those polygons. And you'll see now we can see inside of the pawn, we don't want a hole on the bottom. So we'll go ahead and deselect polygon selection, and we'll add something known as the cap holes modifier. It's right here. Most of the time this works at closing up holes you have in your mesh. So there we go. Pawn is now made. Pretty simple. For the next step, we want to go ahead and make a bishop. Well, first let's name this pawn so we don't get confused on what piece is what. Especially since for our bishop, we're going to cheat a little. So we're going to right click on pawn, and then we're going to click on clone. So with clone, we have three options here. First one is copy. What copy will do, it'll create a copy of the object, and any changes you make to that copy will be unique to that particular copy of it. Instance, on the other hand, will make a copy of the object, and any changes you make to one copy of the object will be applied to all copies of the object. In this particular point, we want to go ahead and use copy, and we can go ahead and rename it right here to bishop, and then hit OK. And just so we don't get confused what piece we're working with, we're going to hit the eyeball on the pawn here. So then we now just have our copy of the pawn that we have renamed bishop. So now on the modifier list, we're going to find edit poly, select that again, and then we're going to do vertex selection. I'm going to zoom out right here a little bit, zoom in, And I'm going to do a box selection from here to, let's say, right there. Oops, a little too far. Right there. My box selection does not like me today. Okay, so we've got that. I'm going to hold down Control to select that's at the top. So we just have the ball at the top of the pond plus this little flare right here. So now we're going to scroll down a little bit here, and we're going to find this option that says Soft Selection. Click it to expand it if it's not already expanded, and then up at the top, check Use Soft Selection. And you'll see all the vertices turn into this neat little rainbow. So this rainbow effect is something known as a heat map. A heat map is just a display using color to to show you how much of an impact something is going to have. So the closer to red, the hotter it is, which means once it's red, it's going to have 100% effect any changes you do. The closer you get to purple down here, the cooler it is, the less effect it has. Purple is 0% effect. So I'm just going to grab this axis right here and move it to the side, and you can see as it's closer to the red color, when I move it, it moves quicker, but when it goes down towards the purple, it moves slower, right? So I'm going to get Control Z to undo what I just did because I don't want to move it to the side. Instead, I want to make it a little bit taller. And this is going to give me a nice stretching effect of the of the shaft of the pawn right here to help make the height of the bishop. And once I've done that, let's go ahead and give it a little bit more flair to its collar. You know what I forgot to show you? I forgot to show you the fall off. So I moved the fall off right here by clicking and dragging, and that just allowed us to adjust how much impact it has going from one point to the next based off of how much distance it is from our selected vertices. We have other options on here that I work with, but for now, since you're just beginning, just keep using the fall off and worry about the rest later. You can play around with them if you want. It's just going to affect how the fall off works. So let me put that back at 0. All right, so again, I'm just going to box select these vertices right there. And then I'm going to drop the fall off down until the bottom of the circle, the bottom of the sphere at the top, is still purple. Too far. So we'll just leave it right there. So then in the top view, I'm going to come over here. I'm going to grab the scaling tool. And with the scaling tool, we can scale it in multiple different axes or single axis at a time. If you highlight just the straight line, it'll scale on just that one axis. If you highlight this bit right here, this bar here, it'll scale on just 2 axes. Or if you highlight the triangle towards the middle, it'll scale on 3 axes. So for this, we just want to scale on 2 axes. We're just going to pull it out a little bit, and that gives it a little bit more flair so that it's a little bit more distinguished from the pawn. Up next, we're going to come up here and click on the very tip of the circle. Now, typically speaking, a bishop's going to have kind of an egg shape at the top. So what we're going to do is we're going to increase our fall off again. I'm going to drag it down till just before the last vertices. So you see these are still purple down at the bottom of the sphere, but we've got the rainbow effect going on there. I'm going to grab our move tool, and we're going to drag up a bit, and it creates that kind of egg shape that bishops are known for. Now there's another thing that bishops are known for, which is a notch taking out of the egg, and usually a little bobble right here at the very tip. So we're going to add those by adding a couple of new objects to the scene. So deselect vertex selection, that's what the bishop currently looks like. Go to the Create tab, and we're going to go back to the Geometry tab right here. I'm going to click on Sphere. Now I'm just going to add a little tiny sphere right in the middle right here. And then I'm going to grab my Move tool and drag it up to the top of the bishop there. It's a little off center. So I can just zoom in here, center it up there. And doesn't need to be perfect for this particular project unless you absolutely want it to be perfect. There we go. So we got the little bobble on top now. It's not attached to the bishop, and we're going to take care of that in just a few moments. But next, we want to create a reference object for the notch that we're going to cut out of the bishop's little egg-shaped head here. So we're going to click on Box, and in our top view again, we're just going to draw a box like that. And when we release, we want to pay attention to our perspective view down here, because we want the box's height to match how big of a notch we want taken out of the bishop's egg-shaped head. Once you find the height you want, you're just going to click the mouse button and set the height. Then you're going to click the Move tool and drag it up to here. Probably right about there. So once you've got it there, we're going to grab the Rotate tool. I'm just going to drag it along this circle right here to give it a bit of an angle. And I'm going to bring it up just a little bit more. So now we've got the base bishop here, little pommel on top, and the reference box that we're going to be taking the notch out with. So our next step is going to be, we'll select this menu right here and go to Compound Objects. Then we're going to select our base bishop piece. We're going to select Boolean, and then we're going to select Add Operands. An operand is going to be a reference object, so we're going to click that, and then we're going to click that. And you'll notice the mesh for all the objects changed as I clicked them. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. I'm going to deselect Add Operands, and I'm going to come over here to the Modify tab. And this is just the same window that we had on the Create object. It's a good idea to get in the habit of deselecting Add Operands before you accidentally start adding objects you don't mean to add to it. So this is our base bishop, box 001, and sphere 001. You'll see those are still over here because the objects still exist. They're just hidden after we add them to the Boolean. They're reference objects. So we're going to scroll down a little bit, and we see operand parameters. So this is telling us how each object is going to be treated once it's added to the stack here. So our sphere, we want it to be unioned because, well, we want it to be part of the bishop. The box, on the other hand, we don't want it to be unioned. Instead, we want to go ahead and select the box from our menu up here, then come down here and select Subtract. And you see that cuts a little notch out of the bishop there. It's got that notch that they are known for. So now we have the shape of a bishop. So the way the Boolean compound object works is it's just a calculation based off of is there an overlap between the two objects? When union is selected, any place there's an overlap, it's going to get rid of the overlapping parts of the mesh and then recalculate the mesh based off of what's remaining as a single union mesh. When subtraction is selected, it's going to take a look at the overlapping parts of the mesh and remove that from the original object, the first thing in your stack right here at the top, and then hide everything else. All right. So once again, there's our bishop. I'm going to click the eyeballs over here next to the pawn and rook. Rook is a little oversized. We'll resize that later. But if I select the pawn and move it off to the side, pawn, bishop. I know it doesn't quite match the bishop that we have on the plane here, but that's okay. Well, let's hide the rook again so we can actually see the bishop. It's a bit different, but you don't have to match what we have on this. This is just a reference image so we can get an idea of what our pieces should look like. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hide the bishop and the pawn, and I'm going to leave the plane open for our next pieces, which will be the king and the queen.